This morning, the Princess of Wales back on the global stage. Kate's first international trip since her cancer recovery, stepping out on her own, a research trip of sorts, learning about a cause she cares deeply about.
Thousands of people have packed the square. People are hanging out the windows, and you can see her right here, meeting some of her littlest fans.
The Coronation Anniversary was meant to be a polished celebration of duty, unity, and royal continuity. But one glittering object changed everything. When Princess Catherine saw Queen Camilla wearing Princess Diana's tiara, the room did not merely fall silent, it froze. Catherine's face shifted, William stepped forward, and within moments, the anniversary ceremony was halted, before the monarchy could pretend nothing had happened. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Catherine stopped, as if the air itself had warned her. She had entered that ceremony prepared to smile through pressure, to stand beside Charles, to support William, and to let the monarchy present its careful image of strength. The Coronation Anniversary, a yearly remembrance of the king's crowning and the promise of his reign, had been planned as a public symbol of calm after months of private strain. Camilla was supposed to stand beside the monarch as proof that the palace remained steady. Instead, she wore the one symbol that made steadiness impossible. Diana's tiara did not look like decoration in that moment. It looked like memory, placed where pain still lived. William saw the change in Catherine before anyone understood it. The prince looked first at her face, then at Camilla, then at the tiara, and his expression tightened with the shock of recognition. He knew exactly why it mattered. Diana was not only a name from the past, she was his mother, his wound, and the public heart of a story the palace had never fully escaped. Charles lowered his program slowly, and the king's silence became its own confession. He did not ask what was wrong. He looked straight at the jewel, and for one terrible second, it felt as if he already knew too much. Camilla tried to remain still. She lifted her chin, held her posture, and waited for Catherine to blink first. But the queen consort's confidence weakened under that stare, because this was not a dispute about fashion or rank. It was about who had the right to carry Diana's memory into a royal ceremony, and who had been denied the chance to object before the damage was done. Catherine did not raise her voice. She did something far more dangerous. She refused to continue. A senior aide moved quickly toward her, speaking in a low tone meant to rescue the schedule. But William stopped him with one controlled gesture. The aide froze, understanding that this was no longer an interruption. It was a rupture. Charles remained caught between Camilla and the future king, while Catherine stood at the center of a silence the palace could not manage. And behind that silence was the question that would soon tear through the room. Who approved Diana's tiara for Camilla? And why had Catherine been kept in the dark? And as the ceremony collapsed into whispers, the real battle moved from the public floor to the faces of the four people standing at the center of it. In that suspended moment, the monarchy became painfully human. Catherine was no longer simply the Princess of Wales. She was a woman staring at the memory of Diana placed on another woman's head. William was no longer only the heir. He was a son forced to protect a legacy in front of the father who had shaped it. And Camilla stood beneath the weight of a crown she could not command. Catherine looked at William before she spoke, and that single glance carried the weight of years. The Princess of Wales, a title given to the wife of the heir to the throne, and forever tied in public memory to Diana, had never been just a position for her. It was a promise. It meant grace under pressure, yes, but it also meant protecting a legacy millions still treated as sacred. William understood that instantly. The prince had spent his whole life watching Diana's memory pulled into public moments, softened by official language, and placed wherever the palace needed emotion. But this was different. This was not a speech. This was not a tribute. This was Camilla wearing the tiara in front of Catherine, in front of him, in front of Charles. Camilla felt the room turn before anyone said a word. The queen consort held her face steady, but her eyes hardened when she realized Catherine would not simply continue. She had entered the anniversary believing the jewel would prove acceptance, not resistance. She expected the ceremony to carry her forward. Instead, the silence pushed her backward, into every old comparison she had tried to outlive. Catherine's stillness became judgment. William's stare became warning. Charles's hesitation became danger. And Camilla knew the room had started asking the question she feared most. Had she crossed a line that could not be covered by rank? Charles tried to measure the damage, but the king's pause only made the moment worse. He knew the coronation anniversary mattered, because it was meant to remind the country that his reign had settled into strength. He also knew Diana's memory could never be treated like a spare royal symbol. Every person near the front understood that the tiara had turned unity into conflict. William was caught between duty to the crown and loyalty to his mother. Catherine was caught between public composure and private pain. Camilla was caught between her title and the history that still followed her. Sophie moved quietly toward Catherine, and that small step changed the emotional balance. The trusted confidant did not interrupt. She did not try to manage the princess or soften her reaction. She simply stood close enough to show support, and Catherine felt it. William noticed it too, and his expression shifted from shock into resolve. Camilla saw that shift, and the queen consort understood she was no longer facing one woman's discomfort. She was facing a united front. Charles finally looked from Catherine to William, then back toward Camilla, and the silence sharpened. The king had not yet spoken, but his face revealed enough. The tiara had not arrived in that room by innocent mistake. Someone had selected it. Someone had approved it. Someone had decided Catherine did not need to be warned. And now the palace had to answer for it. To understand why Catherine's reaction carried such force, the story must move backward to the private moment that made this public clash inevitable. Weeks before the anniversary, there had been a warning. Not a rumor, not a vague discomfort. A specific private exchange had already exposed the danger. Catherine had asked that Diana's personal legacy never be used as palace decoration, especially not during ceremonies designed to polish over old wounds. That request was heard. It was recorded. And then, on the anniversary day, it was ignored. Catherine walked into that private planning meeting, already carrying the weight of what could go wrong. Clarence House, the royal residence long connected to Charles and Camilla, had become the quiet setting for a decision that would later shake the entire anniversary. The meeting was meant to settle wardrobe choices, guest order, and ceremonial details, but one item changed the air. A tiara connected to Diana had appeared among Camilla's options, and Catherine immediately understood the danger. The princess did not treat it as a small styling choice. She treated it as a warning sign. Camilla heard Catherine's objection and felt the meaning behind it. The queen consort did not only hear concern over jewelry, she heard a challenge to her place beside Charles. Catherine said Diana's memory should never be used to strengthen another woman's public image, especially during a ceremony built around the king's reign. William supported her quietly, but firmly. The prince told Charles that symbols mattered, because people did not forget what the palace wanted them to forget. And Charles listened, but the king did not end the matter with the force Catherine expected. Silence did the damage. Camilla sat through the rest of the meeting with her pride wounded, and Catherine saw it. The queen consort had spent years trying to stand without Diana's shadow falling across her, yet this one objection placed that shadow back in the room. William noticed the tension and stayed close to Catherine, making it clear she was not speaking alone. Charles tried to keep peace, but his desire for calm only made the wound deeper. The king wanted the anniversary to look united. Catherine wanted the memory protected. Camilla wanted recognition that did not come with old pain attached. Then the instruction changed. A palace dresser later received a revised note, returning the tiara to Camilla's final selection. The wardrobe note, A simple internal message used to confirm what a royal figure will wear at an event described the piece as historically suitable. Those words sounded harmless. They were not. They buried Catherine's warning beneath polished language and allowed the decision to move forward without facing what it really meant. Charles was told only part of the truth, and that partial truth became dangerous. The king heard that the jewel carried history, not that it carried objection. Catherine's concern had not vanished. William's support had not faded. Camilla's hurt had not healed. The palace had simply moved around all of it, choosing ceremony over honesty. And when Catherine later saw that same tiara on Camilla's head, she knew immediately that the boundary had not been misunderstood. It had been crossed. So when Catherine halted the ceremony, she was not reacting to a surprise. She was responding to a promise that had been broken. The confrontation did not begin with shouting. It began with Catherine turning toward Camilla and refusing to move. The music softened, aids stalled, and William's jaw tightened as the silence widened between two women bound to the same royal story in very different ways. One wore the tiara, one carried the wound, and for the first time, Catherine made the palace stop pretending those things were separate. Catherine stepped away from the line of movement, and the whole order of the anniversary changed around her. The anniversary procession, the formal movement of royal figures through a ceremony, had been planned to show unity and calm. But now guests were quietly redirected. Aides lowered their voices, and the polished rhythm broke apart. Camilla followed only because she had no graceful way not to. The queen consort understood that Catherine was not asking for a private word to avoid embarrassment. She was forcing a truth into the open before anyone could bury it again. William stayed close enough to hear every word. The prince did not interrupt, but his presence made Catherine stronger and Camilla more careful. Charles stood several steps away, watching with the tense stillness of a man who knew the ceremony had slipped beyond control. The king had wanted the day to honor his reign, yet the moment had turned into something more painful. It mattered, because Diana's memory was not private history for the public. It was emotional ground that millions still guarded. It also mattered because Catherine now carried the same title Diana once made unforgettable, and that made the tiara impossible to treat like a harmless jewel. Catherine looked directly at Camilla and told her the tiara was not an ornament. Her voice stayed calm, but that calm made every word land harder. Camilla replied that she had worn what had been approved, and the queen consort tried to make approval sound like protection. But Catherine did not move. She asked who had approved it after her objection. That question cut through rank, through ceremony, through every careful smile the palace had prepared. William then asked what no aide dared say aloud. Did Camilla know Catherine had objected before the final selection was made? The prince's voice was low, but the question carried the force of a verdict. Camilla's eyes flickered toward Charles before she answered, and that one glance changed everything. The queen consort had not simply looked for support. She had looked toward the person who might know how deep the decision really went. Charles felt the room turn toward him. The king had not been accused, not directly, but the silence placed him inside the crisis. Catherine did not demand a public apology. She demanded something sharper, something immediate, something no palace aide could soften. The tiara had to be removed before the ceremony continued. Camilla's face tightened. William did not look away, and Charles suddenly understood that his next words would decide whether this day remained a family wound or became a royal power struggle. And once Catherine placed that demand before the king, the anniversary stopped being about memory and became a question of power. King Charles had survived decades of scrutiny, scandal, duty, and impossible expectation. But now the crisis was not outside the palace gates. It stood directly in front of him. Catherine wanted the tiara removed. Camilla wanted her dignity preserved. William wanted Diana's memory protected. And Charles, caught between the woman he married and the son who would inherit his crown, had no neutral choice left. Charles read the room without speaking, and every face gave him a different warning. Catherine stood firm, controlled but wounded. William watched him with the steady pain of a son who had reached his limit. Camilla waited for protection, expecting the king to pull rank and rescue her from humiliation. But the monarch knew the anniversary could not continue by force. Ceremonial authority, the king's power to approve the order, timing, and public shape of a royal event, now belonged to him alone. If he continued the ceremony as planned, Catherine's pain would become public betrayal. If he stopped it, Camilla's defeat would be seen by everyone. Charles slowly set his folded program down, and that small gesture changed the air. He was no longer hiding behind printed order or palace timing. The king understood why the moment mattered. Diana's legacy was not a closed chapter inside the family. It remained one of the deepest emotional bonds between the monarchy and the public. For William, it was not history, it was his mother. For Catherine, it was not only respect, it was the legacy attached to the role she now carried. And for Camilla, it was the one shadow her title could never fully remove. Camilla's face tightened when Charles did not immediately defend her. The queen consort had expected certainty from him, not hesitation. She had stood beside the monarch through years of judgment, and now, when the room seemed to turn against her, she needed him to stand beside her again. But Charles looked past pride and saw danger. He saw William's anger. He saw Catherine's restraint. He saw that the tiara had turned the anniversary into a test of whether the palace still believed silence could solve everything. A senior private secretary stepped forward with the wardrobe approval note, and Charles took it with visible caution. The private secretary, a senior aide who handles sensitive royal papers and instructions, did not need to explain much. The note said enough. Catherine's earlier objection was marked in the margin. Her concern had not disappeared. It had been recorded. The final selection had still moved forward. Charles stared at the page, and the king's silence became heavier than any argument. William saw his father's expression change. The prince knew then that this was no longer about misunderstanding. Catherine saw it too, and her pain sharpened into certainty. Camilla saw the same shift, and realized the approval she had trusted might not protect her after all. Charles had been handed proof that the palace had been warned, and that warning had been brushed aside. The decision came quietly, but it landed like thunder. Charles ordered the ceremony delayed and requested a private room for the four principals. Camilla looked away. Catherine did not. William stayed close to her side, and the king walked toward the closed door, knowing the public disturbance had become something far more dangerous. Behind that closed door, the monarchy's polished surface cracked further, because consequences had already begun moving through the palace corridors. Outside the private room, no one knew exactly what had been said, but everyone knew something irreversible had happened. Aides stopped using the word pause and began whispering, "Delay." Guests checked their phones. Footmen waited for instructions that did not come. And inside the royal household, the truth became impossible to contain. Catherine had forced the anniversary to answer for Diana. Camilla left the room first, and her silence told the household more than any statement could. The queen consort sat alone for several minutes, hands clasped tightly, face controlled, pride wounded. She had believed the tiara was proof of acceptance, a sign that her place beside Charles had finally become secure. Instead, it had become the object that exposed every old fracture. The Coronation Anniversary program, the planned order of speeches, appearances, and royal movements for the day, had now been formally delayed under the phrase, "private royal consultation." Those words sounded calm. Everyone knew they meant crisis. Catherine withdrew with Sophie, and the trusted confidant did not offer empty comfort. She told the princess that silence would have been easier, but it would not have been honest. Catherine absorbed that quietly, because she knew exactly why the moment mattered. Diana's memory was not only family pain, it was public trust. If the palace could place that symbol on Camilla without warning William or Catherine, then every promise about respect, healing, and unity meant very little. Sophie saw the strain in her face and stayed close, not as a shield, but as proof that Catherine had not stood alone. William received the message while aides were still trying to steady the room. The prince looked down, read it once, then read it again. The message confirmed that the tiara choice had been discussed after Catherine's objection, which meant the warning had traveled higher than anyone first admitted. William's expression changed from anger to cold certainty. He had wanted to believe this was careless. Now he understood it had been allowed. Catherine saw his face and knew the truth had reached him too. Charles moved quickly after that. The king ordered the wardrobe file sealed for internal review, meaning the papers linked to Camilla's final styling decision would be locked down and examined by senior staff. That order frightened the aides because it meant the monarch wanted names, not excuses. Camilla heard about the sealed file and stiffened. The queen consort understood that the question was no longer whether Catherine had overreacted. The question was, who had ignored her? The palace tried to control seating, timing, and guest movement, but the emotional shock kept spreading. Every redirected guest, every delayed instruction, every quiet glance made the same thing clear. The ceremony had not simply been interrupted, it had been wounded. Charles could delay the program, and aides could soften the language, but no one could undo the sight of Catherine refusing to move. William found Catherine before the palace found its official story. The prince did not speak at first. He simply stood beside her, carrying the same memory, the same anger, and the same decision forming between them. Catherine looked at him and understood that the next choice would not belong to aides, files, or palace wording. Before the palace could decide its official story, Catherine and William had to decide what this moment would mean for Diana's memory. The loudest moment of the day happened in silence, away from aides, away from ceremony, away from Camilla and Charles. William and Catherine stood together with no institutional buffer between them. The prince did not need to ask why she had stopped. She did not need to explain why the tiara hurt. Between them was Diana not as history, but as a mother, a memory, and a line neither could allow to be crossed again. William looked at Catherine and saw the cost of what she had done. The princess had halted a royal ceremony in front of the people trained to notice everything, and she knew how the palace could frame that kind of moment. Defiance, drama, disruption. But the prince did not let those words enter the space between them. He told her that protecting dignity was not rebellion. He said some moments demanded silence, and some demanded a line. Catherine heard the pain in his voice, and it steadied her more than any official reassurance ever could. Catherine understood why the next choice mattered. The revised anniversary program, the shortened version of the ceremony prepared after the delay, could still resume and pretend the damage was manageable. But Diana's legacy could not be treated casually. Not after a warning had been ignored, and a symbol had been placed on Camilla's head without family consent. William knew the future monarchy would be judged by how it handled memory, not just power. The future king understood that people did not only watch crowns and carriages. They watched whether pain was respected. William finally said what he had been holding back all day. The tiara had never been just a royal object to him. It belonged to a part of his life the palace could not polish, soften, or control. Catherine listened without interrupting, and her expression changed. She had carried the wound as duty, but now she saw it as his wound too. The prince was not simply defending a public image. He was defending his mother from being used in a moment that would have broken her heart. Catherine made her condition clear. The ceremony could continue only if Camilla removed the tiara. And there had to be an internal acknowledgement that Diana-linked pieces required family consent before major royal use. Family consent meant that those closest to Diana's legacy, especially William and Catherine, would have a voice before any object tied to her memory appeared in a public royal setting. It was not revenge, it was protection. William agreed without hesitation. The prince also understood the risk. If the tiara disappeared before the ceremony resumed, the public would notice. If Catherine refused anniversary photographs beside Camilla while the jewel remained, the palace would face a sharper crisis. But the princess did not bend. She would not stand in a smiling portrait beside the queen consort, while Diana's memory sat between them like a stolen peace offering. William reached for Catherine's hand, and that quiet gesture became the turning point. They were no longer reacting. They were deciding. Camilla could keep her title. Charles could preserve the ceremony. But neither of them would be allowed to turn Diana into decoration. The future king and the princess had drawn the line together, and now the king had to choose how the anniversary would return. When the anniversary resumed, the tiara was gone, and the world immediately understood that something far greater than a wardrobe change had taken place. By evening, the monarchy could no longer contain the meaning of the missing tiara. The public did not need an official explanation to understand the symbolism. Camilla entered the resumed anniversary without Diana's jewel. Catherine stood composed beside William, and Charles looked older than he had that morning. One absence became the image of the day. The tiara was gone, but its shadow was everywhere. Catherine returned with a calm that felt louder than anger. She stood beside William, and the prince stayed close enough for everyone to understand that this was no private disagreement hidden behind palace walls. The revised ceremony, meaning the shortened version of the original anniversary program after the delay, moved forward with a new order. William and Catherine were placed nearer to Charles, while Camilla appeared with less ceremonial focus than before. That change mattered because royal placement is never random. It tells the public who carries weight, who has been protected, and who has quietly lost ground. Camilla walked back into the anniversary without the tiara, and the queen consort knew the public would notice. Palace communications avoided naming the jewel directly, but silence could not erase the difference. Viewers had already seen her wearing Diana's tiara earlier. Now they saw the empty space where it had been. Charles kept his face composed, yet the king seemed burdened by the choice he had made. He had preserved the ceremony, but he had also confirmed that Catherine's objection could not be dismissed. The monarchy had continued, but it had continued on her terms. William watched Catherine face the cameras with steady restraint. The prince knew that people would read her calm as strength, because they understood what Diana meant to her role and to his life. Catherine did not perform victory. She did not look toward Camilla with triumph. She simply stood there, composed and unshaken, while the missing tiara said everything she refused to say aloud. Camilla stayed controlled, but the queen consort looked wounded, and even those who supported her could see the correction. The jewel had been removed. The message had landed. The next morning made the crisis impossible to soften. One major newspaper carried two side-by-side images. Camilla wearing Diana's tiara before the halt, and then returning without it after the delay. The headline read, "The Jewel That Stopped the Crown." That front page, a newspaper's most visible cover story used to define the national conversation, turned a palace disturbance into a public verdict. It mattered because the country did not see only jewelry. It saw Catherine drawing a boundary around Diana's memory. Crowds gathered outside Kensington Palace with white flowers and handwritten cards for Diana. Some stood silently. Some whispered Catherine's name. Some simply looked toward the gates, as if the past had come back and demanded respect. William heard about the gathering and said nothing for several moments. The prince understood what the public had understood. This was not weakness. This was memory fighting back. Charles saw the headlines and knew the palace had lost control of the meaning. Camilla saw them too, and the queen consort understood that the missing tiara had become larger than the jewel itself. Catherine's decision had not weakened the monarchy. It had forced the institution to admit which memories still belonged to the people. And when the noise finally settled, the royal family was left with the verdict no palace statement could soften. In the end, The Coronation Anniversary was remembered for the moment it failed to control. Not the speeches, not the order of service, not the carefully arranged unity. It was remembered because Catherine stopped, looked at Diana's tiara, and refused to let memory be dressed up as convenience. That refusal changed the meaning of the day. It gave the monarchy a verdict it could not rewrite. Catherine emerged from the crisis changed in the eyes of the household. She was not seen as disruptive. She was seen as protective. The princess had risked criticism, whispers, and palace resentment because she would not allow Diana's legacy to become ornamental. That mattered, because royal symbols are never empty. A jewel can carry history, pain, loyalty, and betrayal all at once. Diana linked jewels, meaning pieces closely tied to her life and public memory, would no longer be used in major royal ceremonies without direct consultation with William and Catherine. That final internal decision turned Catherine's refusal into lasting protection. William stood beside her, and the prince's support made the verdict impossible to dismiss. He had not defended Catherine only as a husband. He had defended Diana as a son. The future king made it clear that his mother's memory would not be treated as a flexible palace tool, brought forward when useful and ignored when inconvenient. Catherine understood what that meant for the monarchy's next chapter. If William was willing to draw that line now, then the future would not be built on silent wounds dressed up as tradition. Camilla kept her place, but the queen consort also met a limit she could not cross again. Her title remained. Her role beside Charles remained. But the day proved that rank alone could not erase the emotional boundaries surrounding Diana. Camilla had entered the anniversary hoping the tiara would show acceptance. Instead, its removal became a public correction. She did not lose everything, but she lost the illusion that the past could be worn without consequence. Charles accepted the revised protocol, and the king's quiet decision carried its own confession. The revised protocol, a new internal rule for how sensitive royal symbols would be approved in future ceremonies, showed that peace built on silence was no longer strong enough to hold the family together. Charles had wanted unity. Catherine had demanded truth. William had insisted on respect. And in the end, the monarchy adjusted around the truth instead of punishing it. The anniversary concluded, but its original purpose had changed forever. It was meant to celebrate seamless continuity. Instead, it exposed the cost of ignoring emotional history. Catherine had drawn a line between royal duty and emotional truth, and for once, the palace did not crush that truth beneath ceremony. It moved around it, it accepted it, it remembered it. The anniversary ended, the guests departed, and the palace doors closed, but the message remained unmistakable. Diana's memory had not been borrowed, softened, or replaced. It had been defended.